Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
We didn't need Zop. Yeah? All we need to win are the fellas in this room right now. And all you fellas need to do is believe it.
It's a sign.
That's it, we do.
No, hold on. Hey, knock it off, okay? We're not doomed. No one is doomed. But bumper catch, yes, you're right. It is a sign. I agree. Yeah. Fact is, it's just a sign. All right, guys, listen to me. Belief doesn't just happen because you hang something up on a wall. All right? It comes from in here, you know? And up here, down here. Only problem is we all got so much junk floating through us. A lot of times we end up getting in our own way.
What would Ted Lasso do? That's the question we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple Dabalia.
And I'm Jeff Harry. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you discover your own Lasso way and embrace what it means to believe.
Welcome back, everyone, to Season 3, Episode 5 of What Would Ted Lasso Do? Today we are talking about, sorry, I'm laughing because I just see Jeff over there super excited. Today we're talking about the episode Signs, written by Jamie Lee. She also wrote episodes for the children in Man City, so I could see some of her work coming through that. And then it was directed by Matt Lipsey. So yeah, this was an interesting episode. So Jeff, yeah, let's jump in. What came up for you? What were like your overall impressions?
I literally just finished watching it. I woke up at 4:45 today to watch it right before we spoke, and I'm feeling amped after that TED Talk. I'm feeling excited. Literally a TED Talk. He literally did that. You knew it was coming. It just we'll get to that. I don't know. I'm feeling amped. I'm feeling the most positive about the team that I've felt in a long time. Much more positive than when Zava was even there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
The theme here, let me see if I took my notes. The theme that I picked up on is they can help us see what we can't see ourselves. This whole idea of like, you can't see it yourself, but someone else helps you see it. And it's like, ooh, I like this.
Yeah, I really like that too. I watched this episode about 4 times and it just came out 2 days ago. So
mercy.
And the first time I watched it, I was like, it ended and I was like, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. And I was trying to figure out like why I was having that reaction. And I think it's like, for me, the tone of this episode felt very dark initially. And then as I like got to watching it the second and third time, like then things started to come into like click into place for me. I think it is dark, and I think it's dark by design because remember, like we had heard back in the rom-communism episode about this idea of the dark forest. And so it feels like, you know, they're in that darkest part of the forest now. And it's like when you hit that rock bottom. And so to your point, like by the end of it, I feel like this is where we see the shift happening. And now they're making their way to the path that's going to lead them back to the light. And so, but yeah, I found this episode very dark. And so
what's so interesting that you say this, and I can't believe I'm quoting Evan Almighty as I was watching it last night in my hotel room. And I'm like, why am I watching this? But there's this really interesting moment when Morgan Freeman, who's playing God, you know, says to whoever the person is that's like building the ark, like his wife. And he's like, well, you know, when you ask for courage, you don't receive courage. You receive the challenge
Opportunities,
the opportunity to be courageous, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with this, is with each of these things is this is the moment when to believe, when least likely to believe, when most people have given up. This is when that sign is more important than anything. And it doesn't even have to be represented in an actual physical thing, right?
Yeah.
And I just found that fascinating. But I want to jump to the end, but let's start at the beginning.
Well, I just want to say another thing, though. The other thing I really loved about this episode is I feel like, we've always talked about how our podcast is about looking at this through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. And I felt like this episode went back through all the seasons and like pulled together all the major themes in one space. And especially in that last, like you said, TED Talk, because we hit positive psychology is about positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, achievement, and vitality. And we see all of that come together. And I thought that was really exciting. And so we, in the dark forest, they've been experiencing the self-limiting beliefs, the inner critic, this question of, do I matter? The intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and validation. And then for me, like the biggest theme that I saw in this was growth mindset. And like his whole talk is about growth mindset.
Yeah.
And so, I really like, for me, that was really the overarching theme. And I don't remember if we talked about this before, but there's this idea of operating from above and below the line. Have we talked about that?
No.
This is a really great model. And so we'll definitely include a link to it in the show notes. But there's a model called operating from above and below the line. And in this episode, I saw so many opportunities for this. And the idea is that when you're operating from above the line, you're open, you're curious, you're non-judgmental, and you're open to learning. And when you're operating from below the line, you are closed off, you're judgmental, you're making assumptions, and you're just want to be right. Like that's the only thing. And what I love about the model is it's, like when I work with leaders using this or with coaching clients, where do you want to be, above or below the line? We attach our own values to this. So we always say, oh, I should be above the line. But the reality is that when we're above the line, that's where we see that we have the most opportunity for growth. So the growth mindset, but it's that awareness of where we are at any given moment. And so I love this idea of just checking in with yourself to be like, in this moment, where am I, above or below the line? Because if you have that awareness, then you have the choice to change things. And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because I saw so many opportunities for that here. And so,
well, I also think of then, the idea of like, talk about like healthy masculine, healthy feminine coming out, especially the feminine for him when he's talking about it's, not attaching yourself to the win, not attaching yourself to the self-worth of the result, right? And that in many ways, like play, you're letting go of the results, and that's when you can actually be fully in the moment. The more important outcome is that you actually understand who you are, that you care more about the self-actualization rather than, the external validation. I feel maybe why I'm feeling so hopeful coming out of this episode is because each and every one of these characters is experiencing that. They are finally finding a grounded who they are, and maybe at the bottom of the barrel, but at least they now know what the bottom is, and it's not that bad, and they've been able to survive it. And it's that whole fear thing of like false evidence appearing real. I have now experienced the worst, and it wasn't that bad. And I can survive this.
And building on that is also this idea. So, twice in this season, we've already seen the words not yet being used, right? And so the other thing, was I was going through this yesterday, I was looking up some stuff, and Carol Dweck, for people who don't know, she's a researcher who built on the theory of neuroplasticity, which is this idea that for a long time, people thought that, or, science thought that our brains stop developing at a certain age. But neuroplasticity shows us that we have the capacity to continue changing our brains even as we get older, which is great because we can create new neural pathways, and we're not stuck in one way of thinking just because we've done it for that way for so long. She's the one who really studied, how we praise children and how that, changes how they show up and things like that. But she talks about this idea of the power of yet versus the tyranny of now. And so we see again, like in this episode, a lot of the power of yet is understanding like, okay, I may not be in this space yet, but I have the capacity to grow into it.
Yeah.
Whereas the tyranny of now is such a fixed mindset of, well, I can't do it. So you know what? Like where Colin says, oh, you know what? We're doomed. Well, we're not doomed, right? Anyway, so we will link to, Carol Dweck has a really great TED Talk on that too. And so we'll make sure to link to that as well. But there was 4 key kind of things happening here. I think there was like everything happening with the team. There was everything happening with Ted. There was Nate's whole arc, which I can't wait to talk about. Rebecca's story. So actually 5. And then what Keely's kind of going through as well. And so if it's okay, I'd really like to start with the team because I feel like that's like the biggest thing and it's tied to Ted. But yeah, go ahead. We can jump right into that.
Well, what do you think first regarding the team?
Yeah. So with the team, like when we start out the episode, they've just played Newcastle. We find like that little beginning part had so much stuff packed into it. They've had 7 weeks without a win. That doesn't mean that it was 7 losses though, right? Like we find out afterwards that it's only been 3 losses, but 4 draws.
Right. But they've fallen to 9th place.
Oh, yeah. And it was interesting because when Zava first came on, the commentators had said, oh, if you're Richmond, you're feeling like everything's going your way.
Yep.
And this time they said, if you're Richmond, you feel like nothing's going your way. And so we've talked about this idea of putting like all your faith in one person or one thing, right?
I think the other part that I find, I don't know if it's fascinating, but interesting is this idea that when they first got in the league, it was just like, if they won any games, most people thought they would just get relegated and sent back. Right. And now they're in 9th place, which at the beginning of the season before Zava would have been a great thing, right? From a context standpoint.
Yeah.
And now, it's again, it's all about like expectations are the thief of joy. Right. And now it's just, they're not living up to their potential and everyone's frustrated. And then all of a sudden now you start seeing this heckler that I haven't seen before.
I know.
Like, who is this heckler guy? And I'm like, is this a new character? So I'm fascinated with what's going to happen with that arc, with that dude. But yeah, there's a lot more anger. And then even one of the, Richmond faithful is just like, this is what happens when, you have positivity. And then he gets hit by the owner of the bar because they're like, we don't want to hope because when we get hope, we feel disappointed. Right.
Yeah.
And then that's that whole fixed mindset below the line of like, hope is a bad thing.
Right. It's the hope that kills you. That's their motto, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting. And it reminded me of that idea that we've talked about around toxic positivity, right? He says, I knew that positive thinking was bullshit. And it's like, well, it's not bullshit, but it's also not about just saying like, oh, just being positive, but really using positive emotions in a way to like open again. The more we know that the more positive emotions that we experience, the easier it is. Like that's when we find ourselves in that growth mindset place and vice versa. The more we have a growth mindset, the more we experience positive emotions.
Right. It's not about the sign and the sign being ripped and falling apart. It's about something much bigger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting also to kind of notice the coaches, right? Like, well, first of all, to your point about people freaking out about the team, it's funny, all the discussion around like, oh, do they even belong in the Premier League? But they used to be in the Premier League before they got relegated.
Right.
So like, but I get it because they're not doing so great. But 9th place, you're right. Like it's still better than being at the very bottom where everybody expected them to be.
They still have a chance too. That's the other thing.
Yeah. But it's like the coaches are in a really interesting place. Again, we talked about this last time. Like Nate didn't recognize the role that he played for this team, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you feel like the coaches are just in this like disarray now. Like they don't really have it together. They're second guessing themselves. And what I thought was really interesting is like when they come back in after the match and Ted's like, I just don't know what happened. And they're all like, oh, defense and offense and this and that. Roy says, if we're just gonna, if the players are just gonna stand around watching Zava, it's like, but you guys told them to
Mm-hmm.
like have Zava be everything. And so
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. And I didn't know if I was missing something or,
Well, when they went through all the permutations, right, of like why they are so bad, whether that's the defense, the offense, or Zava, it really more so communicated to me that they don't believe in themselves right now. Like that's the bigger thing, right? It really doesn't matter what we do. We're fucked there regardless, right?
Yeah.
And then what's interesting is then, Rebecca comes in.
Whoa. That was intense.
And she's just like, I just have a small question. Are we ever gonna win a fucking match? Like it's like, whoa, like, okay, but I get it, And then I love when he's like, no, we're gonna pretend we're a ship and we're gonna point north. And then they can't even agree where north is and can't even find north.
Yeah.
But that's just a perfect example of not only are they not on the same page, but they're just off. They're just all off. And it's because, they've all in many ways have lost hope and are like, well, what are we supposed to do at this point? Because we're built off of believe and none of us are believing right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you've got like Ted's version of believe that most of the team is now into, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Zava and his believe, which is also very interesting because I love Jamie and that little pep talk that he gives the team. And then nobody, like, let's stop acting like a bunch of little bunny rabbits.
Right.
I was like, that's awesome. And then Zava gets up and basically says the same thing that Jamie just did.
Same exact thing, but in Zava ways.
I saw this meme on social media about, Jamie now understands what it feels like to be a woman in a meeting.
Right. That's so true. He's just like, and he was just like, really? Is it this great? Everyone, this is what we like.
But it's like, it's interesting because, so Zava is, when he started giving his pep talk, the music that they used was very similar to the music they had used for Ted's pep talks in the past. And so I felt like there was a little bit of that coming in. But when he retires and he's like talking to his followers, I mean, not followers, by believers, I was
His
like,
believers.
whoa.
Oh my goodness.
And so his version of believe, like going back to how like everyone thinks of him as like this god, right? And so that, like, I don't know, it was an interesting kind of to see that, like that's one, like if you look at this on a continuum, I feel like that's one end of it. And then there's the other end of it, which is, or maybe he is like just in this place of where, like, I think he's the out of balance kind of thing on the continuum though, right? Like there's the believing in yourself, which is what Ted is trying to get everybody to do. And then there's the egotistical version of that, which is where I think Zava is, where that's all he does, right?
Well, this is also kind of ties in with the whole me versus we, right?
Yeah.
Or the, or the Marshall Gans story of us, story of self, story of us, story of now, with this idea that, Ted wants them to believe in themselves and then in connection also then believe in the team, right? And believe that it's possible now for them to do that. That's the whole paradigm. But for Zava, it's always been just believe in me. He's stayed pretty consistent that entire time, right?
Oh, yeah.
So now he's just like, so now my belief has moved to my avocado farm. So believe in me there, But for Zava, it was never about the team, right? I think what Zava, if he resonated with anything, was that idea of believe, but I believe he misinterpreted it as everyone believing in him. That's why when they first were together, he stood in the middle, right? And they had to put their hand on him rather than put it on the sign or anybody else. So, yeah.
I just want to talk about Isaac for a second. McAdoo, he just continues to like grow as a leader. It's so fun to watch him. And two things that stood out for me. So number one is him telling everyone like, go up to, take a shower, no video games before bedtime unless it's Animal Crossing, which I thought was really cute.
Love it.
But even, after their second match, when they're coming off the field, off the pitch, and that heckler again is now like pointedly attacking him.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in the past, his anger would have definitely gotten the better of him. Right. And he would have like gone after the guy or something. But he just, like he took it, he walked in and he was down and stuff. But I feel like he has really kind of stepped into this space. He's being a model for the team. And he's also bought into this idea of believe, he more than anyone. But I think it's going to be interesting watching how that like transforms now. But I love that when he was looking at the picture of Nate with Anastasia, however you pronounce it, he says like, when they're all talking about She's All That, the movie, and he says, oh, no, his growth is going, or his transformation is going to happen on the inside. And so like, I just thought that was like such a cool thing that he's recognizing,
I feel like both him and Jamie, are both stepping up as leaders, right?
Yeah.
And while like Zava pontificates about, how his wife is the most beautiful thing, or, he's just going off another one of his speeches, like both of them truly, I believe, have more of a pulse of the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because when Zava apparently retires, because I thought he was actually going to like join West Ham. That's what I thought. I thought he was going to
get injured. Like they were going to purposely injure him or something.
Something, right? Who's the one that started crying?
Danny. Danny's like
Daddy Rojas. Yes. So when Daddy starts crying, it's just like, yeah, that happens when you put so much of your belief in something external, right? And the danger of doing that, or the danger of what the whole team has done this whole time, that they're like, even Colin being like, we're doomed, And I even think about when Roy is going around and he's encouraging everyone right before the game, and then he gets to Colin and he's like, cheer until you bleed, like Colin is now comfortable in his role of sitting the bench, that when he's put on the pitch, he doesn't really know if he believes anymore. Like, even though like, frankly, they need him at that point, even though now he's on the pitch and this is what, he's been trained to do, he's lost like that faith. And you see that with a lot of sports teams at first when they lose their star player. But there's many other times when, I remember, I think when Alex Rodriguez left both the Seattle Mariners and then again left the Texas Rangers, both those teams did better. Both those teams made the playoff that year without a star, because now all of a sudden they were challenged to step up. And that is what gives me so much more hope, is finally clearing out the poop, which was Zava and them doubting themselves, and now they can start fresh and anew.
It's interesting that you just said that. It made me think of, so this MPEAK course that I teach, it's about mindful performance, and it was created by UC San Diego Center for Mindfulness for the men's national BMX team. And it was because they had, in one set of competitions, they had medaled and done really well. And then after that, they were really struggling. And so the coach was like, okay, I know that these guys have the talent and the skill. So this is all a mindset issue.
Yeah.
And we hear that from the announcers as well, right? There's all the talent is on the field. So this must be an issue with the clubhouse. And so they're talking about Ted, but it's really like the mindset of the players. And so to your point, and when we talk about Ted's TED Talk, that's a big part of this, is like, again, going back to this idea of belief, but like clearing out the noise. And so this is a lot of what we do in mindful performance, is how do we get into that mindset where we can focus when we need to focus, clear out all the other stuff so we don't get in our own way, because we will always get in our own way. That inner voice will always tell us we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not fast enough, whatever the issue is, unless we start to change our relationship to it. And so that's a big part of it. I don't know if you heard what Roy actually said to each person, but it's all food related. And so he says, peel them, slice them, mash them, eat them. And then when he gets to Sam, he shakes his hand and says, outclass him. And so I thought that was really funny.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing you said, I think in sports, sometimes they call it the yips.
Mm. And we've seen that on the show, remember?
And we've seen it on the show, but it has destroyed some people's careers. I literally was just talking to someone about a shooter that like just lost their ability to shoot. And now they don't even start for their team and they're about to be let go of their team. And
you're talking about basketball.
in basketball, yeah. Yeah. But this has happened in many other sports as well, right? And it's scary because especially when you've been doing this your whole life and then all of a sudden the one thing that you are known as a master at doing you can't do, then what, right? And maybe that also is kind of what Ted is hitting on is this idea, our friend Angie Cole has talked a lot about this as well, this idea of like you almost can connect more with who you are and do your best work when you've let go of trying to do your best work, when you can sit in the duality of both being like messy and also striving for perfection. Like you strive to achieve something really amazing, but you also let go of the results, which is really hard to do when you put so much time and effort into something.
Well, and that's also what it means to be in a place of flow, right? Like when we're in a place of flow, we're not necessarily thinking about the outcome, but we're engrossed in this present moment. And like we're in this place where, things are easier, but there's still just enough challenge to keep us interested, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, absolutely.
And they haven't been present, frankly.
Yeah.
Since Zava arrived.
Yeah.
So.
And since West Ham, right? Like it's really since West Ham that that loss, I think, has really hit them. Because it starts with the coaching team and then works its way down as well, right? So coaching team is very lost right now, not sure what to do. And then you've got just players who they're not sure, and it screws with your head, right? Like it makes you wonder what your purpose is. Like, why are you doing this?
Yep.
And so we can see a lot of where they're at. But I want to come back to Ted's talk afterwards because it spreads out to so many people. So let's talk a little bit about Nate.
Nate Jelly? Nate Jelly? Are we talking about
Nathan Jelly?
Right
yeah. Yeah. Jason Jelly. That's what she called him last time.
Jason
But
Jelly.
this time that guy, Derek.
That guy called him Nate Jelly. I loved it.
Yeah. I love this. I feel like this episode we got to see our old Nate again, like a bit of it. Oh, yeah, I see your face. I don't think you agree. I don't know.
I agree. I just feel as if you're, you've been talking up Nate. You've been getting Nate's back when no one has, and you're like, you see, he's coming around, and you're just like, you're right. He is coming around.
But he's still, that's the thing. He's super unsure, and it was interesting because what this reminded me of is like. He's now like the head of this Premier League team, the manager of it, but he continues to lack confidence, right? To me, like when I see this again, it's like this nervous system reaction because a lot of times we're in this space where we just say to ourselves like, oh, if I just reach this level, things will change, right? Like when I get promoted, it'll be better. When I become a leader.
When I get a raise, when I get this amount of money. Yeah,
exactly.
All those things. External validation, external rewards. Yeah.
All of this, again, is all about mindset, right? Because if we can't see who we are or what we can do where we're at now, when we get to that next place, it's not going to make it, it's not magically going to change for us. And so we've talked about like the nervous system reactions, fight, flight, freeze, fix, fake, right? And so Nate is like, his nervous system is going nuts, right? Because he's been in this place of fight. So blaming like Ted, blaming himself, like when we see the spitting flight, he just left Richmond, right? Rather than dealing with the situation, he just up and left.
Yep.
Thinking that if I go somewhere else, things are going to be different. Fix. And so fix is one of the ones here. And fix is like this if-then proposition, if this, then that. And so in his mind, if I'm running my own team, I'll be more confident. And, and this idea of being worthy of the job that he keeps insisting on, like that he has earned, right? And then fake. is the big one for him, which is this mask that he wears and he tries to hide behind, and he's not good at it. And people can see that, right? He's not confident. And so it's interesting that when he finally, the fact that he didn't ask for the supermodel's number, right? And Miss Cakes gives it to him, and then he calls his mom.
I love that.
I thought that was so sweet.
I love that. To practice. And then she's like, no, you should use the word should. Like, oh, it's like, oh, okay. That is hilarious. I love his mom. His mom has been so supportive of him the whole time. Come on.
Yeah.
And I just love that he keeps going back to this restaurant. I'm like, dude, he's obsessed with this restaurant. But then you find out later that so many things in his life happened to that restaurant, from like birthdays to anniversaries to him getting celebrating his promotion to assistant manager. Like, I didn't know any of all those
at
things.
Richmond, right?
At Richmond, right?
What's interesting is he didn't say anything about celebrating his promotion to manager at Westinghouse.
No, he did not. He did not talk about that. But I think also, and this is something that I found fascinating, was Anastasia, right? It's so much about perfection and image for her that even when she's like, yeah, the food's good, the food's great, whatever.
But I can't Instagram it.
I can't because it's not perfect, right? It's not Instagram worthy. And again, it's a perfect example of like, this is the ideal person that one would want to be with. And then you find out that like, it's so superficial. And that person isn't even enjoying their life, right? That they are stuck, beholden to their own followers because they've always chased virality. And they're like, well, I can't post something like this because it doesn't fit. I can't be even seen in this restaurant. And then even when he starts talking about, why this restaurant's important to her, she can't even listen for the 1 or 2 minutes that he's sharing the most important things with him. Yeah. So when finally she's like, I got to make a phone call, again, lying to him and being like, I got to just make a phone call, but I got to take everything with me.
Not even half-hearted. Like, it's just.
Yeah, it's not even a good lie, right? And then she just walks across the street. It actually is like, again, it's kind of like Zava walking away. You're like, good. Like, this is actually better because there's probably a better meal without her than when it was with her, because then he had to continue to pretend rather than just enjoy the meal.
I love that he is back to, like, we just see that side of him, right? Like the fact that he would bring someone who clearly is used to, nicer places, nicer things, to this place that just is sentimentally important to him. And then when he says, the baklava is divine, and that's where you see that first kind of like, when Anastasia is talking about this place is so sad and dumpy and whatever, you see Jade kind of roll her eyes, and then right, and then when Nate says that about the baklava, you just see this kind of smile. And I think she she's starting to see like, oh, this is the guy who comes in here trying to be this big person, which honestly is annoying when people do that, and so you can see like where she kind of wants to put him in his place all the time. And so, yeah, it's really lovely to see kind of her just like crack a smile. And then when he gets left behind, I love that she still brings out the baklava for two. And when he asked her to join him, he's like, unless you'd like to join me, no, just like he still doesn't think like, and I don't know, like she's intrigued at that point enough to where she's like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
And I just love that scene. Like they're just sitting there talking and laughing. And it's like, she makes fun of him a little bit, right? Like, well, after all, our baklava is divine.
Yeah.
And she's like calling him out on his crap. And he's like, and I love his admission, right? Like when I try to impress someone, I end up sounding like my grand.
Right. Well, I mean, it's also, I think what is so refreshing about her is she's not here for the bullshit. She's just not here for the BS.
Yeah.
And she probably gets BS'd all the time as like the hostess there, like having, and people being like, I need the window seat and blah, blah, blah. So she's constantly seeing that. And for the first time, this guy drops his veneer at his lowest, what
Mhm.
he would consider his lowest point, right? Now he's alone at this place when the whole goal was to impress Jade, right? And, by bringing this supermodel, and now he's sitting there and yeah, and then he's humble enough to be like, I'm alone. Would you like to join me because I'm alone? And that maybe that's the first time he's not faking, as you said.
Exactly. And yeah. And then that's when like that's the point, right? Like when we can show our true selves, like this is the idea of belonging. If we
Yeah.
can believe that we're worthy of love and belonging and we can take off all those masks, like that's where you get that true connection with other people. And we see that happen for him. And I think that it was so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I was really happy for him.
What's so interesting is there's a lot of comedians that talk about when they finally gave up on trying to be a comedian and just did not care about what they said. They just were like, whatever, I'm going to say whatever I want. That's when they were successful.
Mhm.
That's when it all started to come together for them because all the filters were gone and they were like, you either take me for me or not, but whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm tired of trying to fit some mold that doesn't make sense to me.
Exactly. Happy for Tate.
I know. This is already so many and so many emotions. Ooh, can we go to Keely? I thought that was
Yeah, let's
fascinating.
talk about Keely. Yeah, tell me what'd you think?
I mean, I had been talking about this, right? She has to fire Shandy. Like, when was she going to fire Shandy? And when finally the moment arrived where Shandy is now like, because she's been told no, right? Talk about like a toxic worker. She's been told no about something. She almost ruined banter. A lot of people are now not even using it because of what she did. And she sees no consequence for that and she doesn't really care, but she's bitter, so she starts talking about this new app that she's going to make, and she's basically like protesting at work. She's like not even doing any work.
Yeah.
And the level of entitlement now is so powerful that when she finally is called in for a crucial conversation, one of Keely's first crucial conversations, she's just like, so am I getting a raise?
Yeah.
Like
She's so
she
out of touch.
like so has not picked up on anything. So that when Keely fires her, I just love the Jerry Maguire rant
Mhm.
that she
Yeah.
goes on. And she's
Unsuccessfully.
like, who's coming with me? But I thought that was so interesting about that moment was just regardless of what she offered, right? She was like, I'll double your salaries. I'll give you 3 months off. I'll do all these things. People didn't want to join her because they didn't want to be with someone
Yeah.
that works like her. I don't think a lot of leaders get this, that a lot of times it's not about the stuff. It's not even about like the benefits or all of that stuff or the compensation as much as it is. Don't get me wrong. That stuff is really important, but people will follow you if you have respect for them and, you create a psychologically safe space for them to do their best work. But no one wanted to join her because like they knew that it would not be successful and she's not a great leader.
Yeah. Yeah. And they've said that, like, right? Like people don't leave jobs, they leave leaders,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or they don't take jobs, they come to a leader. So
Right.
what did you think about Jack's suggestion of how to fire Shandy?
Oh, the compliment sandwich?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a bullshit sandwich. I hate the compliment sandwich. I've always someone recently was saying how, because now so many people know it,
Mm-hmm.
it's like eating bullshit because the whole time you're waiting, you come in with something positive and then you give the real thing and then the last slice is supposed to kind of like wrap it up. Now I find that sandwich, the open face sandwich, any type of sandwich thing to just be BS because
Yeah.
again, it's like tiptoeing around the truth rather than just giving it to someone.
Yeah.
And the best advice I've ever received regarding, having a hard conversation, you're like, don't tiptoe around it, just have it.
Mm-hmm.
Just have the conversation. You're doing someone a disservice by trying to mask it, right?
Yeah.
Or trying to hide it under some slices of crappy Wonder Wheat bread.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. As soon as she said that, I was like, ugh, because it just feels disingenuous to me.
Yeah.
And it really undermines you as a leader, right? Because when we give positive feedback, we don't sandwich it between two pieces of negative, right? Like
Yeah.
and so first of all, it makes your positive stuff, it makes people feel like you're gaslighting them because they don't
Uh-huh.
think they can trust that either. And, we've talked about this idea of creating psychological safety, and a big part of that is transparency. And so,
Yeah.
as a leader, this is a terrible way to lead. And it's
Yeah.
better, like we've talked about this idea of giving ongoing feedback, right? So celebrating the wins and the good things and letting people know. And, a lot of times people will, like leaders will feel like, oh, I don't have time to do this all the time. But it's not like a 1 hour conversation. It's as simple as like, a one sentence, hey, you know what, that was amazing, what you did was fantastic, or recognizing someone in front of the group or whatever, so that when there's a negative thing that needs to be addressed, you can be direct and just say, look. And feedback is about having a conversation. It's not a one
Uh-huh.
way thing, right? And the compliment sandwich like really just takes that away. And so instead of like this mutual opportunity to learn and figure out how best to, do something in the future, it becomes this like one way thing of like, here's what you did wrong. But I think you're great, but here's all the stuff you did wrong. It's disrespectful to your staff, and
Yeah.
it's more about having control over the situation. And so it doesn't promote innovation. It doesn't promote connection. So yeah.
And it makes someone really scared of you, right? Because then you're like, anytime anything positive coming, you're like, well, foreboding joy, right? Is the other thing coming as well?
Exactly.
What's ironic, though, about Shandy quitting and the way she quit actually bonds that team more,
Hmm.
because she is now putting out there all these reasons why you should leave. Here are all these reasons. I recently talked to a friend of mine that was like, someone wanted to buy her organization for a huge amount of money. And she was just like, no, I believe in the organization. So no. And she walked away from that money. And it's just like that experience, that opportunity makes you more rooted in like who you are and why you're there. And now, because they've been offered this and they're like, no, I think they feel a little looser. And that's partly, you see that when Dad, of all people, I didn't even know his name was Dan. I didn't even know who he was. It's just like, I quit. And she's like, oh, and he's like, no, I'm joking. And this is like, none of those people,
And he's so like deadpan, right?
none of those people have ever joked, have ever made one joke. And now talk about play, right? In attunement.
Hmm.
Now all of a sudden they're slightly playing their, Keely's is rubbing off of her, right? Like the Barbara perfection is slowly dissipating and people are feeling a little bit more loose to kind of joke around and things like that. Yeah, I thought that was just awesome.
And it's like taking that one toxic piece out of the environment, right? Like we've talked about that
Yeah.
too before, that
Yeah.
sometimes you have that one toxic person that like poisons the whole
Yeah.
group. And when you remove them, it changes the dynamic. And so it shows the team like, hey, I care about how this team operates and that kind of thing. And we see that like Barbara, who's been calling Keely like Keely and with a very judgmental tone, also shifts. And like as she's leaving that night, she says, oh, good night, Miss Jones. Like she changes it back to Miss Jones as a sign of respect,
Yeah.
And so I like that. Also, I will say Shandy's departure had very Edward Ofuku
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
vibes to it, right? Kind of over the top. What do you think of Jack? I'm curious.
Oh, the venture capitalist?
Yeah.
I like Jack. I mean, the fact that like Jack is willing to clean poop up with Keely is like a big deal, right? Like that perfectly shows, is that person, I see this with any leader, like, is that leader willing to do any other job? Right. And at that point, the job was to clean up the lamb poop, and she was willing to do it with her. And I respect that. I really actually appreciate that. And it seems like they have much more of a rapport than they had before, and they recognize like that Barbara's stiff and, and
Yeah.
they're trying to get her out of their shell. But I think that has also helped, her team, because the rapport between Jack and her has created more of a place where, you know, they're, I don't know, they're helpful. I mean, Jack is also trying to help Keely when she goes like, yeah, so I'm gonna have to let you go. And then she's like, "Oh, you're firing me?" And she's like, "No, I'm just showing you how to actually let someone go." Because she's like, Jack's like, "I've let a lot of people go. Like I've done this many times, and it seems like maybe you haven't, but this is how I would do it." And she was right up front and blunt with it. And Keely listened to that feedback.
I don't know. I feel like something's off with her. Like there are some of those mentorship vibes from time to time, but even from their first meeting, like I think they have like chemistry together for sure, right? You can see that. But I'm not 100% sure of her yet. Like I feel like she does a lot of observing.
Yeah.
And she's just constantly watching and taking things in. And it was interesting to see the two of them kind of get together. I guess I'm surprised because I felt like that was really low-hanging fruit. I didn't think the writers would necessarily go there because it felt kind of expected in some ways to me.
Oh, really? Oh, I did
Yeah.
not see that at all. Okay.
But I also think we're back in this territory again, like we were with Rebecca and Sam, where there's a major power dynamic here because
Ah,
Jack controls all the money,
that
right?
is true.
And she
That is
controls
true.
like what happens with Keely's business. And so we're back in this space again where we've got this uneven power dynamic. And I don't know. I don't trust her fully yet. So I'll be curious to see where that goes.
I get that vibe. There's not much to go on, right? If anything, it's kind of like a surprise, like Game of Thrones, where you're like, huh, okay, I guess they're getting together. Hey, go
Yeah.
for it. Good,
Yeah.
good for you. Like, that's awesome. But I didn't see any signs that led to it up until that moment, and it could just be like a whim, who knows? But they just went through. I mean, talk about like a team building. It's ironic that a lot of people do team building events when a real team building event is dealing with lamb poop. Like that's a great way of like, again, literally taking out the crap
Yeah.
and then having that memory for all times, right? Like that created that opportunity where then they're both then willing to be more vulnerable and then share all of their relationship stuff, and then also that vulnerability then creates a certain level of intimacy. So I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
it's just a fling, or maybe it's something more. Like,
Yeah.
go on with your bad self. That's all I was thinking. I was like, you do you. Like, enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look, I have no problem with Keely. Like, I think she leads with her heart, and I think she
Yeah.
falls for people based on that connection. I think that's great. I just, again, I'm just like, I don't trust this woman yet to
You're
see.
protective of Keely.
I'm
I get it.
protective of Keely, exactly. Especially because she's not connecting with Rebecca. Like,
She's not connected with Rebecca. She's disconnected from Roy. She's still thinking about Jamie. She's got a lot going on. Keely's got a lot of going.
and that's the other thing, right? Right before they kiss, like
Mm.
Keely's talking about how hurt she still is from Roy. So for me, this feels very much like she just wants to feel loved. She just wants
Yes,
to feel,
exactly. Yes,
and this person sitting in front of her is giving her that attention. And
exactly.
so for me, that's what it felt like. But let's talk about Rebecca real quick. So Rebecca is still thinking about that matchbook and wanting to get rid of it because she thinks it's silly. And then she's back at that cafe and we get to see John Wings Night again.
Oh man, you had to look that guy up because I did not know what his name was at all. I had forgotten he existed.
And he has now shown up with this woman who he is engaged to. And they have this like awkward exchange. And the woman uses the term shite in knighting armor. And so now Rebecca's like freaked out because, she's got the matchbook, she's got the shite in knighting armor language. She's not quite sure what to think. And so we see Rebecca now on this mission of like looking for signs and like
Yeah.
trying to see like, should I believe in this? And
Yeah.
because if all these other things came true, then is it possible that maybe she could become a mother? And so then, she goes to see the doctor. Oh my gosh, so much debate on what the doctor said to her. at the end of the
Oh,
conversation.
interesting. Well, before we go into that part, I still find the cafe fascinating, right? Because talk about like external validation, right? Especially for this dude. What's his name? John Wing something?
Wings night.
Wingstein. So John clearly has been going to this cafe over and over again, trying to bump into Rebecca. Like, let's just be honest about what this guy is doing, okay? He's like a weaker version of Rupert. Like, I'm gonna show off my new engagement. And then they have this like whole story about how they met, and it's a horrible story. It's just like I forced Anthony Hopkins to be Hannibal for my more, and she's like, my knight in shining arm. I mean, it's just like, okay, great. I'm glad you found who you are, but is he still happy? I don't know. There's still this vibe where I'm just like, there's still this keeping up with the Joneses type thing. And then I think I see a glint in Rebecca's eye of being like, oh, this person won, or this person is ahead of me because they found the love of their life, and and I haven't, right? And then when she goes to the doctor, just simply filling out the form.
Yeah.
The form. What are you going to put as your emergency contact? I've felt that as well, where you're just like, who am I going to put? Who's someone that I lean on? And she looks around the room, right? And she sees that most people, I don't know if it's everyone, but most people,
they're all coupled up.
Are coupled up, right? There's someone there to support them. And she's about to try to find out and talk about believe, right? Talk about believing, that is it possible for me to still have a baby? Like, I want to believe, I have hope, even though this seems ridiculous about this, right?
Yeah.
Does she see Higgins? She sees Higgins before she goes to the doctor, right?
Yeah.
And she asks him about like the whole thing about the psychic, and his he validates her by being like, hey, my aunt, I don't even know what her name was. Devora, picked that we would have 5 kids, right? And 5 boys, and that's what's happened. So she's again is now also truly believing.
Isn't the thing about the wet toilet seats? I was like, oh.
Oh, yeah, wait, say that more. What?
Where he says, and now we're just a house full of 5 boys and a bunch of wet toilet seats. I was like, oh,
I did not remember that at all. Oh, that's so gross, but that's so real too. That's so real. Boys are gross. So gross. So yeah, so there's all this buildup to it, and talk about going back to like the believe sign is like, she really wants to believe it's possible and is like so close to, like the doctor already knows the first time when he meets her. It's just like he already knows what she wants to talk to him about. So I want to just give context before we talk about what then happens.
Yeah, I mean, and so again, Hannah Waddingham, just like Jason Sudeikis, like their facial expressions and they're like so powerful.
Yeah, so good.
So I don't know, lots of chatter about, he confirms that she's pregnant and that's why she keeps looking at the matchbook. I don't know. I kind of feel like I
did not get that at all. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Whoops.
I don't know, but I kind of feel like she went in there saying she didn't think it was possible. She wanted to find out. And then when she talked to the doctor, she says, yeah, I understand. And it's what I thought. And so
it's what I thought. She said,
yeah,
it's what
so
I
I
thought.
feel like he confirmed that she can. And so this to me, like this goes back to what you're talking about, believe, like this idea of becoming a mother. There's so many different ways to do that, right? It's not just getting pregnant and having a baby. Like you can adopt, you can maybe become a stepmother. Like there's or like she's already kind of a mother figure to Nora. Like there's so many different ways. And so can you believe that there's other ways that this could happen for you? So again, that growth mindset, this isn't happening yet, but there may be other ways that this will come up later. And so for me, that's how I was seeing this whole thing take place. A lot of people said that her smile at the end when she tries to call Keely seems similar to the smile that Michelle had after the whole thing with Ted last time. And I don't know, I just didn't see it. Like, I don't think she was like excited or happy. I think it was just, she can put it to rest in a way. But I could be totally wrong, but that was my take on it.
Yeah, I at first thought that, right? That, that she was just told like it's not going to happen. But now I think about it, thinking of my dad who was a cardiologist, like, and the way in which he would diagnose people or give advice or stuff like that, or whenever he would talk to someone. Doctors don't speak in absolutes, right? A
Right.
lot of scientists don't speak in absolutes. So I could have even seen the doctor saying something to the effect of just like, yes, it's possible, and also it could be dangerous, right? Or it could be,
Yeah.
like there's a 20% chance that you could have a baby rather than a 50 or 60% chance. That's usually how these things go, right?
Yeah.
They usually
Yeah.
don't say it's for sure. So yeah, that's kind of more of the vibe that I got, where it's just like the team, it's not a high likelihood you're going to win the championship, but you're just in ninth place. You're not out of it yet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like that's part of the thing that I also felt. But also, I agree with you, right? And then there's also all of these other ways in which she could become a mother.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. I'm sure they will eventually tell us what's happening. But yeah, just it's amazing how many people are talking about this right now. And like really getting into it with each other over it. It's like
Interesting. I did not even get that. People are really like leading in hard.
it's been interesting. I have to like limit myself these days because I can't take some of it's just like too much.
It gets a little conspiratorial after a while, right? Where
It
people
really
are like,
does.
well, I saw the wind flapping in the window, so that must mean. And you're like, dude, come on. Like,
You see people who are just like, can we just watch the show, please? Like,
I know.
as we have a whole podcast where we talk about this stuff. But
it's also, I know exactly, like we're hypocrites as well. Hello. No, but it's interesting also the evolution of not just a Ted Lasso fan, but like any show, right? Because at the beginning you're just dating it. Your first season, you're dating the show, you're getting along with the show. You're like, oh my gosh, this is something I could actually commit to. I could commit to the show and watch all of it.
Yeah.
And then by the second season, you're just like, I really like this show, but then by the third season
to notice
you're like, you're trying to control it a little bit. You're trying to like, you have a little, is the show going to leave me? Like, is the show changing? Don't change, like people.
You start to notice all the things that you don't like anymore or that annoy you.
Don't like about it. Yeah. Yeah. They leave the toilet seat up. Why is the show leaving the toilet seat? Leaves the dishes, doesn't wash the dishes at night. Like that's the relationship you're having. And then you start to get angry at it anytime it deviates from what you want it to be. So it's fascinating.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Ted, because I want to make sure, like, we're already kind of close to time, and I just want to make sure we get to talk about Ted and his TED Talk. And so
yeah.
The big thing going on in Ted's life right now is we find out that Henry is involved in a bullying incident. Well, aside from what's happening with the team, of course. So I don't know, like when he got that initial message from Michelle, my mind automatically went to, I bet Henry's the bully.
Oh, you thought that? I thought that was a possibility.
Yeah.
But not that big. Yeah. I still thought that he got bullied.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. But going back to this idea of growth. So even though like the team's been in the dark forest and everybody's been dealing with their stuff, in that dark forest, they've had, like you were saying, those opportunities to like lean into their fears, right? And and they've been stepping up in different ways. And so Ted, we now know that Ted's panic attacks are like associated with worrying about Henry.
Yeah.
Right. So like that very first one back in season 1, he could hear Henry's voice. Right. And then subsequently, we've seen that happen. And so in this case, it's like after the match. Well, so after the first match, when they're in the office and he gets the message, I just loved that Beard. I've never seen Beard so protective of Henry, where he's like, if we take the flight through Paris, we could be in Kansas. And his whole like
by noon.
Yeah. Like I was like, whoa. And then, okay. So then Beard's whole thing, I mean, not Beard, Roy's thing about dealing with bullies, like that was super dark. Like
that was way too dark, dude. That was
I
I
was
didn't
like,
know where that
what?
was going. I was like, and then you beat him with the red paint,
The
and then
rope
you
soaked in
stop,
red paint.
and then you do it again. You just do it. I'm like, yo, this guy has gone off the rails.
Yeah. And the 4 a.m., right? 4 a.m. is when people are least able to protect themselves, which is interesting because that's the time that he practices with Jamie is 4 a.m.
Oh, that is true. Most
So-
vulnerable. And I was like, this Roy, this is some 2020 type stuff, like Dateline NBC type stuff right here.
Yeah. So then we find out that Ted's been having a hard time getting in touch with Henry after Michelle tells him that no, in fact, it was actually Henry who was the bully, not that he was being bullied. And so he's like staring at the pyramid of success. And then he starts to notice the panic attack coming on, right?
Yeah.
Because he's probably thinking about like where Henry fits on this pyramid, right? Or if he does. And then Henry calls him. And, I loved that earlier Beard was like, Henry's a good kid because you're his dad.
Yeah.
And we see that that's actually right. Like Henry owns up to what he did. He's done this rap apology to his classmate.
Which has such a Ted-like vibe to it.
Yeah. And Ted references the song The Message. And so I looked it up and I didn't know this, but it was actually one of the first hip hop songs that really provided social commentary. So it was like a protest song. And so that's like what The Message was. But anyway, we can link to more information on that because it was actually a very interesting article. But what I loved here was the depiction of him having learned how to work through his anxiety. And so like we see Ted after he gets off the phone with Henry, go into full blown panic attack mode, right? Like it totally comes. And so now he not only uses the breathing exercises, right? But he's visualizing Henry going down the escalator. And then he puts his hand on his heart. And so you're talking about someone who's experiencing any kind of trauma, putting a hand on a heart or a hand on your arm, like it's self-soothing. And so we see him using some self-soothing techniques. And then he starts to repeat, he's okay, over and over, right?
Yeah.
And so the breathing is regulating his nervous system and he's starting to talk back to the fear. And this is really important because anxiety happens because the part of our brain like that allows us to analyze things and make decisions, the prefrontal cortex doesn't have enough information. And so like we saw during COVID, like people having so much anxiety, it's because the brain has nothing to compare the situation to.
Right.
Doesn't have enough information. And so when it doesn't have that, it starts to create stories, right? Because we have that negativity bias, we automatically go to worst case scenario.
Yep.
And so by repeating over and over, like, he's okay, he's telling his brain, like, hey, you know what? This is not a threat. There's nothing going on here. We have enough information. We know he's okay. So we can calm down. And so it was such it was so well done. And I really just, again, hats off to the writers because I thought that was an incredible way to show that. So.
Well, it also shows how far he's come, right? He doesn't call Dr. Sharon. It's not even that's a Dr. Sharon call right there. Like he doesn't do that. You know, he doesn't run to Facebook and look at where the doctor that now is with his wife or his ex-wife is. Like he doesn't run to these unhealthy things. And he practices all the techniques that he has learned, man. Like, come on. And this is what makes me so excited. It's just like, that is the moment when you're like, oh, Ted is about to be Ted again. Like Ted is about to do that practice talk that he did with Jamie. You know, we're talking about practice. Like he's about to be the Ted coach that I've been missing for a really long period of time, right?
I don't know though, because so let's talk about the talk. I feel like he's actually pretty distracted because he says he needs to go talk to the team. He goes in and he just said, he says a few things.
Yeah, he says, I'll just see you guys later.
Yeah. And it's not until Sam is like, what about Zava?
That's what I loved about it, right? I loved it. It was just like he was listening. He was finally grounded enough to listen.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the point, right? Like it could have happened then, it could have happened later on, but it just was like, okay, well, let's have this right now, right?
Yeah.
And they're all struggling, right? They're all struggling. They're doubting themselves. They're not rooted in themselves. They have, they are, Colin's saying they're doomed,
Mm-hmm.
and then Ted starts to talk, and then the sign falls down. So it's just like, oh my gosh, and then of all things, anyone that should be pulling that sign down and tearing it apart, it's Ted.
Yes.
That tears the sign apart. And people are like, oh my God. I mean, they're like literally like
convulsing,
having convulsions, right?
Yeah.
And he's just like, it's not about the sign, guys. He says we have a good thing here. We didn't need Zava. All we need is the fellas that are in this room, which is really true. It's what has gotten them out of relegation. It's what's gotten them to third place, and now they're in ninth place, but it's what's gotten them here, right? And he's like, yeah, like, what is it? In fact, it's just a sign. Believing is happening just because you hang something on the wall. We got so much junk, and we need to get it out of our way, like crap, like envy, fear, or shame. I don't want to mess with that shit anymore. Do you? And then he goes around and he asks each of them, like, do you? And it's a reference again back to when they're in the sewer. Like, what are we doing? We're like sitting in the shit, and we don't need to sit in this sewer right now. And I love that he's like, I believe that I deserve that, what is it? This whole idea of like, I want to believe in hope. And as long as do you believe in yourself, and as long as you do believe in other people, like that is the fundamental point of being alive, right? And if we can truly do that, each of us truly do that, then nobody can rip that apart. And that's what I loved about like the symbolism of that, of just like, it's always been within us. And finally, I now understand it again.
Yeah.
Having gone through this really painful, panic attack again, but for the first time, I'm like, I'm starting from the bottom, and now we're here, right? And one other theme that comes up for me is I think of all the big crucial conversations that happened throughout the entire episode. Keely firing Shandy, Keely also talking with Jack. Rebecca having that talk with Dr. Wagner, right? Ted having that really important talk with his son, and then finally having this important talk with his team.
Yeah, I really loved it too. And I think what's interesting is when he goes through that and he talks about belief being inside of us, he points to the head, heart, and gut. And to me, like, this is where most of us struggle, right? Like, if we really start to listen to our bodies and our gut and trust it more than anything else, it's not going to lead us wrong. Like people say that all the, it won't lead you wrong, but it's so hard to trust that. And so, to your point about the junk floating through us, he's referring back to the self-limiting beliefs, right? And so our gut tells us, hey, this does not feel right. This is not a good choice. This is not whatever, or this is awesome. And our self-limiting beliefs get in the way. We get in our own way, and we can't believe in that, right? And then as he goes through each thing, the belief that I matter, what I do want to mess around with, the belief that I matter.
I matter,
and regardless of what I do or don't achieve.
Yes.
And they cut to Nate and Jade, right? So Nate is finally starting to realize this, like, I matter. And we've talked about this in the past, that those subtle acts of exclusion that he experienced for a while, it makes you feel like you don't matter. And so he's starting to understand that. And then Ted says, or the belief that we all deserve to be loved, right? And so we cut to Keely and Jack, whether we've been hurt or maybe we've hurt somebody else, and they cut to Roy.
Roy, yeah.
Right? And then, or what about the belief of hope? That's what I want to mess with. And we cut to Rebecca in the car with the matchbook, right? So I love that they bring in like each of these things. And then he says that I can get better and that we will get better. And so this comes back to that power of not yet, right? or the power of yet. So the growth mindset and the above the line thinking. And it makes sense, right? So if we can believe in all of that, then nobody's taking that away from us because that's from within.
Yeah, we've already won. We've already won.
Yeah.
If we actually believe that.
Yeah. And so for me, like, I think that the crux of this talk was this idea of, again, coming back to positive psychology, right? I want to know that I matter regardless of what I do or achieve. And it reminded me of Brené Brown talking about, I am worthy of love and belonging, right? Like we are all born knowing that we are worthy of love and belonging. And then all the other stuff starts to get in the way.
Yep.
Right.
And then we start doubting that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
when we were kids, we actually do believe that, right? And that's the joy that we have. And that's why maybe a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people enjoy being around kids is because they're so loving and so hopeful and so, just believe the world is full of love and that they're giving out love and receiving love, right?
Yeah.
And I really do love that, what you said about when he says the belief I matter regardless of what I do and don't achieve. Because it goes back to, I think I've mentioned this before about like Tarana Burke, who ran the Me Too campaign. And, she was at Wisdom 2.0 speaking. And she goes, right now you're taking me to the Emmys, you're taking me to the Grammys, you're taking me all these Oscars and stuff like that. But I was doing this work in church basements and community centers beforehand. And I will continue to do this work regardless of the praise that I'm getting. And when you're coming from that place, that's why I feel so much hope for the team now.
Yeah.
It's just then it's not about the wins and losses. It's about simply being present in the moment and believing in themselves and one another. And man, that is a strong team. Like that is a dangerous team. That is a team that can surprise a lot of people. And it's great also because now no one really believes in them. So which actually makes the team believe more in themselves, right? And
exactly.
And you've seen this with real teams when they're in the locker room and they're celebrating their championship or celebrating achieving something they never said before. And the coach will always be like, remember, it was always about what was just in this locker room. What do we believe in this locker room? And nothing outside matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more they let go of Twitter and all that other stuff, the more the more they're finally ready to be the true AFC Richmond.
Yeah.
And that gives me so much hope and belief.
Yeah, I love it. Such a good episode, which I didn't start out thinking it was, but I had a growth mindset. What's your biggest takeaway?
The biggest takeaway about the conversation. The big conversations, what are the big conversations that we have to have, right? And this idea of what are the big conversations we have to have and how do we actually let go of the results of that, And I also resonate with the whole idea of my value is not tied to what I do or don't achieve.
Yeah. Worthiness is not tied. Yeah. Yeah. My biggest takeaway is just that reminder. I'm worthy of love and belonging exactly as I am. And I love that because I think I forget that all the time. So,
and what's interesting is I'm in Sacramento right now about to tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow I'm doing a talk for a bunch of leaders, mayors, and other county supervisors, all those things in California. But the talk is why Ted Lasso's masculine and feminine leadership matters.
That's awesome.
And this is the first time I'm doing this talk about incorporating some Ted Lasso into it.
Nice.
And I'm super excited because, as I was talking to a bunch of leaders, they reward toxicity a lot, especially in government. So it's going to be interesting to see through the lens of Ted Lasso, can I connect with these people and make them believe once again in something around healthy feminine and masculine leadership. So we'll see.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. This was really great. And I feel like we have a lot of supersized episodes these days, but I appreciate you. And this was a great conversation. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. So excited.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, Try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Instagram or on our website, wwtldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other TED Heads took away from the episode or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Every rating helps us get our show in front of more listeners. To that end, we'd also ask if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, loved ones, randos on the street. You get it.
Thank you to the team at Podify for producing our show, to Kajal Dabalia for all our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slato for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch. Or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?